Throughout history, rulers have devised brutal and shocking methods of execution to strike fear into the hearts of their enemies. Among the most terrifying was blowing from a cannon. This punishment, rarely used outside of South Asia, involved literally tying a condemned person to the mouth of a cannon and then firing it. The result was both a gruesome spectacle and a warning to others. Though it may sound like something out of a horror story, blowing from a cannon was very real. It was used famously during the British colonial period in India, but it had deeper roots in Mughal and regional Indian practices. The act of blowing from a cannon, also known as blowing away, seems to have originated in India during the Mughal Empire in the 16th and 17th centuries. The Mughal rulers, like other monarchs of their time, needed to find ways of discouraging rebellion and ensuring loyalty from their vast armies and subjects. Traditional execution methods like hanging or beheading were common, but blowing from a cannon was far more dramatic. By the 18th century, it was a known form of punishment in the Indian subcontinent. When the British East Indian Company expanded its control, it inherited not only territory and soldiers, but also some of these brutal practices. During times of rebellion, the British found blowing from a cannon to be both effective and symbolic. It displayed ultimate power and ruthlessness. The mechanics of blowing from a cannon were simple but horrifying. Firstly, there was the preparation of the cannon. A field cannon was used, usually one already in the arsenal of the army or garrison. The cannon would be loaded with gunpowder, but without a cannonball, since the human body itself would provide the material expelled by the blast. Sometimes a small wadding was included to ensure a more forceful discharge. Then there was securing the prisoner. The condemned person was tied directly to the mouth of the cannon. Typically their back was pressed against the muzzle, with their arms and legs secured by ropes. This positioning ensured that when the cannon was fired, the blast would tear the body apart instantly. Then, of course, there was the blast. When the cannon was fired, the explosion of powder created a tremendous force. The victim's body was literally obliterated, often split into pieces, with parts thrown high into the air or scattered across the ground, and this even included bone fragments that would embed into witnesses' bodies. Contemporary witnesses described torsos, limbs, and heads flying off separately in all different directions. The shock of the blast and the speed of the dismemberment meant death was instantaneous. There was also the public spectacle. Executions were usually carried out in public, with soldiers, townspeople, or even rebels being forced to watch. The sight of a human body torn apart by artillery was meant to terrify anyone who considered defiance. In some cases, multiple cannons were set up to execute groups of rebels at once, multiplying the psychological impact. Even birds and other animals would then pick at the remains which were scattered everywhere. One of the most disturbing aspects of blowing from a cannon was not just the violence itself, but what it meant for local religious beliefs. For Hindus, the destruction of the body was deeply troubling. Hindu funeral rites often required cremation of an intact body, allowing the soul to move on to its next life. To have one's body scattered in pieces meant the soul might wander endlessly. For Muslims, proper burial was a sacred requirement. Without a body to bury, many believed the victim would be denied entry into paradise. In this way, the punishment was not only physical but spiritual. It attacked the condemned person's identity and beliefs even in death. This made it especially feared amongst Indian soldiers and rebels. The British most infamously used blowing from a cannon during the Indian Rebellion, often called the Sepoy Mutiny. This was a widespread uprising of Indian soldiers, sepoys and civilians against British rule. When the rebellion was crushed, British officers sought to reassert their authority with maximum brutality. Many rebels were executed by hanging or firing squad, but some were deliberately blown from cannons. Eyewitnesses recorded scenes of rebels tied to the muzzles of artillery pieces, their bodies ripped apart in front of crowds. British commanders justified this as both punishment and deterrence, ensuring that no further mutinies would arise. This act also carried symbolic weight. Rebels had mutinied using their own military weapons. The British turned those very weapons into instruments of terror. Blowing from a cannon was not common. It was not an everyday punishment either. It was reserved for moments when a government or army wanted to make the most strongest possible statement. Unlike hanging, which could be over quickly and tidily, or beheading, which, despite the head would leave the body intact, cannon executions left a shocking and unforgettable impression. Spectators not only saw the victim die, they saw the destruction of the human form itself. In a society where religion and burial customs were crucial, this amplified the fear. Rebels or soldiers considering mutiny knew the price of disobedience could not only be death, but also eternal spiritual unrest. European travellers and chroniclers who witnessed the punishment in India were horrified. Accounts in newspapers and memoirs describe the executions in vivid detail, shocking audiences back home in Britain. Some British commentators argued that such punishments were barbaric and dishonoured the principles of civilised rule. Yet others defended the practice as a necessary measure in extreme cases. The debate over its morality reflected broader tensions about empire, justice and power. As the 19th century went on, blowing from a cannon became increasingly rare. By the late 1800s, the British government, facing criticism both at home and abroad, largely abandoned it. More conventional forms of execution were used instead, such as hanging or shooting. However, the memory of the punishment lingered. Indian histories and British colonial records both preserved its terrifying legacy. Even today, the image of a rebel being tied to a cannon evokes one of the darkest chapters of colonial rule. The execution method of blowing from a cannon stands out in history not only for its cruelty, but for its symbolism. It shows how executions were not only about ending a life, they were about sending a powerful message. It projected power. The rulers who used it showed they controlled the tools of war and death. It inflicted fear. The gruesome spectacle frightened enemies into submission, and it was struck at faith. By destroying the body, it attacked the condemned's spiritual future as well as their physical life. Today, blowing from a cannon is remembered as one of the most violent punishments in world history, a grim reminder of how far states and empires were willing to go to maintain control. How blowing from a cannon worked is a story of both mechanics and meaning. Mechanically, it was simple. A cannon, a rope, and gunpowder were enough to obliterate a human body in an instant. But its true power lay in its spectacle, the horror it inspired those who watched it, and the deep religious fear it provoked in those who might one day face it. In India, under Mughal and British rule, it became a weapon not just of war, but of psychological domination. Though it has long since vanished as a practice, its memory continues to haunt the pages of history as a chilling example of punishment pushed to its extreme. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.